What would you do if a 9-year-old boy wearing duct-taped boots came up to you and said, "I can help your child walk again"? And then it actually came true. That morning in Birmingham, Alabama, the cold was biting. No snow, but the wind was sharp enough to turn every breath into fog, and fingertips felt like they were being pricked with needles. Outside the Children's Medical Center on 7th Avenue, adults bustled in and out, wrapped tightly in scarves, clutching steaming coffee cups, walking briskly as if trying to leave their worries behind. But one person wasn't in a hurry. A boy sat alone on a piece of old cardboard right next to the hospital's revolving door. In his hands was a worn-out notebook filled with simple but thoughtful sketches. His name was Ezekiel Carter, but everyone called him Zeke. He was only 9, bundled in an oversized wool coat with sleeves rolled up to the elbows, a boot held together at the toe with silver duct tape, and a red knit hat pulled almost completely over his ears. The strange thing was, he never begged, never tried to draw attention. Zeke just sat there quietly, observing. He showed up nearly every Saturday, as if something unspoken kept him anchored to that spot. At first, hospital staff tried to chase him off, but eventually they gave up. He wasn't causing trouble, just smiled gently when spoken to, and when he wasn't sketching, he simply watched. Have you ever seen a child's eyes that looked as deep as someone who's lived through lifetimes? That was Zeke's gaze. People speculated he had a loved one being treated inside, maybe his mother, maybe a sister, but no one really asked. In places like this, everyone has their own pain to guard. Across from the hospital, a silver and back-range Rover was parked right next to a fire hydrant. The engine was still running, but the driver didn't move. The man behind the wheel was Jonathan Reeves, late 40s, sharply defined features, streaks of gray at his temples. His tie was loose, his dress shirt wrinkled, but the polished luxury car made one thing clear: he wasn't short on money. Still, the exhaustion in his eyes showed there were things wealth couldn't reach. In the back seat, his 6-year-old daughter Issa sat quietly in her booster seat, her skinny legs wrapped in a pink blanket. Her light brown curls were clipped to one side. Her eyes were wide open, but she said nothing. That accident had stolen her laughter and her little legs. She used to climb trees, run, and chase cousins in the golden dusk. Now, all of that lived only in her distant gaze. Jonathan opened the door and gently lifted his daughter into his arms, as if even the slightest jolt might break her. He didn't notice the boy on the sidewalk. Most people didn't. But Zeke missed nothing. He saw the way the man bowed his head, the tremble in his hands as he held his daughter, and the way Issa's little eyes looked skyward, avoiding the looming building in front of her. Zeke watched them longer than usual. Then, just as they were about to pass, he stood up and quietly said, "Sir, I can help your daughter walk again." Jonathan froze, not because he was offended, not because he was confused, but because of how the words were spoken. It wasn't a sales pitch. It didn't sound like a child's joke. The voice, calm, soft but firm, as if the boy's belief couldn't be shaken. Jonathan turned around, skeptical. "What did you just say?" Zeke didn't flinch. He stepped forward, clutching the notebook under his arm. "I said, I can help her walk again." Jonathan stared at the duct-taped boots, the oversized coat, then into those deep black eyes. "Don't you think that's disrespectful?" he asked, voice low. "I'm not joking," Zeke replied. His voice didn't waver, no smile, no hint of childish mischief. Just a strange, unwavering certainty that made it impossible not to listen further. Surely this was just some weird coincidence. Maybe even a hoax. Jonathan said nothing more and walked into the hospital. But the boy's words echoed in his mind. That voice didn't carry blind hope. It wasn't hesitant. It had been spoken like a simple fact. And that was what made it so hard to forget the strange little boy. For hours afterward, Jonathan tried to stay focused on Issa's appointments. He nodded through reports from the physical therapist, the neurologist, the rehab specialists, but all of them used the same familiar phrases. It'll take time. Try not to expect too much. Miracles don't happen overnight. He'd heard them so many times they no longer meant anything. And yet, Zeke's words still itched at his thoughts like something he couldn't scratch away. I can help your daughter walk again. By early afternoon, Jonathan carried Isa out of the hospital. The sun had peeked through the clouds, but the chill still cut to the bone. He walked toward the car, holding her just like always, when he noticed Zeke still sitting there. Still on that same cardboard, same old notebook in hand, but this time the boy looked straight at him, as if he had known all along that he'd return. Jonathan hesitated. He glanced at Isa, her head resting on his shoulder, eyes half closed, her body too light for a 6-year-old. He sighed and turned toward the boy. "You again?" he muttered, stepping closer. "Why would you say something like that? You think this is funny?" Zeke shook his head, his gaze serious. "No, sir. I'm not joking." "You don't even know who she is?" Jonathan said sharply, gently placing Isa in the back seat. "I don't have to know to help," Zeke replied without stepping back. Jonathan straightened. "How old are you?" 9? 10? "I'm almost 10, Zeke said calmly. "You're just a kid sitting outside a hospital with your boots held together by tape. What could you possibly know about helping a child with a disability like my daughter?" Zeke lowered his head, fingers brushing the edge of his notebook. "My mom used to help people walk again," he said softly. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. "She a doctor?" "She was a physical therapist. She taught me a lot," Zeke said, looking up, his eyes unwavering. "She said the body always remembers, even if it forgets for a while. The instinct is still there." Jonathan opened his mouth to respond but stayed silent. His eyes shifted. A nurse walking by waved at Zeke. A janitor from the hospital nodded to him. They all knew the boy. They weren't avoiding him. They didn't doubt him. "I'm not giving you money," Jonathan said firmly. "I'm not asking for money," Zeke replied quickly without hesitation. "Then what do you want?" Zeke took a deep breath and stepped closer. "Just 1 hour. Give me a chance to prove it." Jonathan turned to look at Isa. She had opened her eyes, quietly watching the conversation. She didn't say a word, but her gaze was full of questions, tinged with a fragile hope. Jonathan rubbed the bridge of his nose. He should have walked away. He should have called security, but he stayed. Zeke remained silent, saying nothing more. Jonathan let out a sharp breath, his tone curt. "Fine, if you want to waste your time, go ahead. Meet me at Harrington Park tomorrow at noon. Don't be late." Zeke gave a small nod. "I'll be there." Jonathan climbed into the car, started the engine, and drove off without looking back. But in the rearview mirror he could still see the boy standing there, arms hanging at his sides, his face quiet like a page yet to be turned. That night after dinner, Jonathan sat alone in his home office. Folders and documents were spread across the desk, tangled and meaningless. Nothing in them could explain the look in that boy's eyes. The way Zeke had stood there, as if holding a secret grown-ups had long forgotten. Isa peeked into the room, her voice soft. "Dad?" He looked up. "Yes, sweetheart? Who was that boy today?" Jonathan hesitated. "Just someone we met outside the hospital. Really seemed to believe it," Isa said quietly. "Believe what?" "That I could walk again." He froze. Isa gave a small smile and lifted her tiny fingers, pretending to step over the arm of the chair, as if her hands were her imaginary feet. Jonathan didn't smile, but inside him, for the first time in a long while, something stirred. Not resignation, not sorrow, but something far more dangerous. Harrington Park was the kind of place people drove past without noticing. A cracked basketball court, a few rusty swings that creaked in the wind, and a patch of grass trying and failing to pass as a soccer field. On Sunday afternoons, the place was usually deserted, but today was different. Zeke had arrived early, sitting on a bench beneath the park's largest oak tree. He was still wearing the oversized coat, but the sketchbook was gone. In its place was a small sports bag at his feet, next to a neatly folded towel. At exactly 12:07 p.m., the familiar SUV rolled into the lot. Jonathan said nothing. He simply lifted Isa out, placed her in her wheelchair, and pushed her over to Zeke. There were no greetings exchanged. Jonathan's arms were crossed, his face skeptical and guarded. Zeke stood as they approached. "Good afternoon, sir." "Hi again, Isa," he said politely. Jonathan gave a short nod. Isa gave a shy wave. Zeke smiled. "Hi." Her eyes lit up a little. "Hi." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "How do you know her name?" "You said it yesterday," Zeke replied. "I remembered." Jonathan didn't respond. He nodded toward the towel. "So? What now? You lay that out and we fly on it like a magic carpet?" Zeke didn't flinch at the sarcasm. "No, sir, just some basic steps." He opened the bag and pulled out a pair of clean socks, a tennis ball, a small jar of cocoa butter, and a cloth pouch containing something soft and round, like warm rice. Jonathan squinted. "What's that?" "Something my mom used to use," Zeke explained. "It's warm rice, used to relax muscles and warm the body. The tennis ball helps stimulate pressure points." Jonathan crossed his arms again. Zeke turned to Isa, his eyes gentle. "If it's okay, I'd like to touch your legs a bit. It won't hurt, I promise. If anything feels uncomfortable, just say stop, okay?" Jonathan said. Isa looked up at her father for permission. Jonathan exhaled slowly, still clearly unsure. "You can try, but be very careful." Zeke knelt by the wheelchair, gently unwrapped the blanket around Isa's legs, and placed the warm cloth pouch on her thighs. Isa flinched slightly. "Too hot?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, it's warm." "Nice." Zeke nodded and waited patiently for the heat to settle in. Then he began gently rotating her legs, side to side, up and down. No pulling, no forcing, just soft rhythmic motions, like a lullaby in movement. Jonathan stood close by, eyes fixed on Zeke's hands, ready to intervene at the first sign of discomfort. But nothing went wrong. "Have you done this before?" he asked, still suspicious. Zeke didn't look up. "My mom used to take me to shelters after school. She helped veterans, people who couldn't afford therapy. She always said, 'Everyone deserves to feel human again.' I used to carry her bag." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "And she taught you this stuff?" "Yes. She said the body doesn't always need machines. Sometimes it just needs to be noticed, to be touched." Zeke tapped Isa's knee lightly with his knuckle. "Do you feel anything?" "No," Isa whispered. Zeke nodded again, unbothered. "That's okay. I'll ask again later." As he continued the massage, he started chatting with Isa, asking about her favorite colors, favorite food, the shows she liked to watch. At first, Isa answered with short, hesitant replies. But slowly, she began asking questions too. "Do you live nearby?" "Close enough." "So do you still go to school?" I used to." "What about now?" Zeke paused for a second. "My mom got sick, then she passed. I've been trying to get by." Isa lowered her head. "I'm sorry." Zeke gave a soft smile. "Thank you." Jonathan stood silently, his shoulders slightly more relaxed, though still not fully at ease. About 30 minutes later, Zeke gently pressed against Isa's ankle again. "Feel anything?" Isa blinked. "It's like someone's pressing." Zeke looked up at Jonathan. "That's good." Jonathan narrowed his eyes. "She's said that before during formal therapy." Zeke nodded. "But those therapy sessions were all machines. Sometimes kids get scared, their bodies tense up. But here," he gestured toward the sky and the trees around them, "there's wind, there's sunlight, there's space. It feels different." Jonathan didn't respond, but it was clear he was listening. Zeke continued helping Isa stretch both legs, then showed her a few simple movements for her toes. Just small actions, like little twitches. Isa tried. Nothing obvious happened, but her eyes didn't show despair. "I'll show you more next week," Zeke said as he stood. "It takes time, but her muscles," he pointed to Isa's thighs, "still remember how to move. They just need to be reminded." Isa smiled, this time brighter. "Hi, Macbeth. Betha. Back up, down. Coming." Jonathan cleared his throat. Let's not make any promises, he said quickly. I'm not promising anything, Zeke nodded. I'm just trying. Jonathan looked at the boy for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded bill. Zeke stepped back, his voice firm. I don't take money, sir. Jonathan froze. Then? Why are you doing this? Zeke gave a slight shrug, eyes still on Isa. Because your daughter smiled? Jonathan looked down at Isa. That smile was still there, gentle and pure, like sunlight after a storm. But he still couldn't understand. How could a boy who had lost everything still give so much to someone who was nearly a stranger? The following Sunday was warmer, but Zeke still wore his oversized coat, not because of the cold, but because it made him feel like his mom was still with him. She used to call it the healer's coat. She'd say every good healer needs something to remind them why they care. By 11:45, Zeke was already at Harrington Park. The towel was spread out, supplies neatly arranged, and a water bottle placed beside him. A few kids were playing basketball nearby, and the distant barking of a golden retriever, maybe a Labrador, echoed through the neighborhood. At exactly noon, the familiar SUV pulled up. Isa was beaming before the car had even come to a full stop. Zeke waved. Hi, Isa. Hi, she chirped, her light curls bouncing as Jonathan lifted her down and set her in her wheelchair. Jonathan still looked tired, but this time it wasn't the heavy kind of fatigue. It was the weariness of someone who had walked a long road and was finally starting to believe he was heading in the right direction. He gave Zeke a small nod. No words, but none were needed. Zeke began the session. Same routine, same warm rice bag on her legs. But something had changed. This time, Isa was more proactive. Can you try pushing your heel down to the ground? Zeke asked gently. Isa closed her eyes, her face focused. No movement. That's okay, Zeke reassured her. Sometimes the brain needs to find the path again, like trying to push through a crowd. You have to be patient. Jonathan stood behind them, arms crossed, but not in caution, just because the air was a little chilly. Where were you doing all this? Jonathan asked suddenly. Zeke looked up. Because I remember what it felt like when my mom helped people. She made them feel like they mattered. I want to do that too. Jonathan nodded slowly. Have you ever thought about doing something else? I have, but this feels right for me. Jonathan turned to Isa. She was trying to tap her toe against the ground, just lightly. But there was movement. For the first time, he said nothing. He just stood and watched. The weeks that followed, they kept coming. Same time, same place. Zeke taught Isa how to use elastic bands to strengthen her ankles. He rolled a tennis ball under her foot, helping her brain relearn where her feet were. He showed Jonathan how to massage pressure points behind her knees, explaining how even silent nerves still hold function. They just need to be awakened. Signs of progress began to appear. And then a bad day came. On the fourth Sunday, Zeke showed up as usual, but when the SUV arrived, no smile greeted him. Isa's eyes were red. Jonathan looked like a ticking time bomb. Something had happened. Had something disrupted all the progress they had made? And Zeke, a boy with nothing but memories and belief, what would he do on a day like this? She doesn't want to do therapy today, Jonathan snapped, placing Isa into the wheelchair. Isa turned her face away, refusing to look at either of them. Zeke approached carefully, his step soft like he might shatter something fragile. What happened? Isa folded her arms, her voice sharp. This morning I tried to move my legs, but nothing happened. Nothing. I'm tired of this. It's all pointless. Jonathan looked away, jaw clenched. She's been frustrated all weekend. Zeke nodded, then knelt beside her. You think I've never been tired? She said nothing. You think I never sat in a shelter, crying because my mom couldn't afford her medicine and I could do nothing but watch? Macy's eyes began to drift toward him. You have every right to be angry. So do I. But if you give up now, the part of you that still wants to walk will give up too. Isa stared down at the ground. I don't want you to give up, Zeke said softly. Because I haven't. Silence. Then Isa whispered, I'm scared. Jonathan turned sharply. It was the first time his daughter had admitted it, openly, without hiding. So Zeke moved closer, his eyes gentle. I'm scared too, but being scared doesn't mean you stop. It just means you're getting close to something that matters. Isa wiped her face. Okay, let's try again. And they started over. Zeke guided Isa through the motions, this time with fewer words. Just presence, patience, and healing touch. Jonathan began to participate more. He helped Isa shift her weight, encouraged even the tiniest movements, even a slight twitch. After 30 minutes, Isa moved her right foot, not just a toe, her whole foot. It slid forward, slowly, stiffly, but unmistakably it moved. Jonathan dropped to his knees beside his daughter, blinking rapidly as if afraid to believe it. Do it again, he whispered. Isa did. Zeke just sat quietly behind them, smiling, saying nothing. That night, Jonathan stood on the porch of his Crestview home, gazing at the moon hanging in the deep blue sky. He no longer wondered who Zeke was. That question no longer mattered. Inside, laughter rang out. Isa was telling her aunt over the phone about the moment her foot slid forward. For the first time in 6 months, the house no longer felt like a hospital room. It felt like a home again. But something else was changing too. Not just his daughter's legs, but Jonathan himself, the weight on his chest, the guilt, the self-blame, the wall he'd built between himself and the world was beginning to crack. On Monday afternoon, Jonathan sat in his office staring at an unopened contract. His phone buzzed nonstop, emails, calls, client updates, but nothing felt urgent anymore. The only thing looping in his mind was that moment in the park, the moment Isa's foot slid forward as if it had never forgotten how. He had seen it with his own eyes, and the one who made it happen was a 9-year-old boy in duct-taped boots. With no relatives, no credentials, Jonathan opened a new browser tab and typed, Ezekiel Carter, Birmingham. Nothing substantial came up, just a few scattered mentions in old local news and some school databases. He started clicking through the links. For the first time, it wasn't to verify the boy, but because he genuinely wanted to understand him. Jonathan found a few scattered notes about Zeke and his mother, Monique Carter, from an old community clinic. No address, no recent updates. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. His boy was like a ghost. But in truth, he wasn't. By Saturday, they were back at Harrington Park, but everything felt different now. Jonathan brought an extra mat and folding chair. When they arrived, he said nothing, simply set down a sandwich next to Zeke's gym bag. Zeke nodded in thanks and tucked it away. He'd eat it later. Ready, Aisha? He asked. Isa gave a big thumbs up, beaming. Let's do this. They began the familiar routine, warm compress, stretching, toe exercises. But today, Jonathan didn't just observe. He joined in completely. Sitting cross-legged on the grass, he followed each movement Zeke demonstrated. At one point, he did a stretch wrong. You bent it backward, Zeke said with a grin. Jonathan glanced sideways. Haven't stretched like this since college. They all laughed. Even Isa, her giggles as light and pure as spring wind. About 20 minutes in, Zeke leaned forward. Isa, let's try something new today. He pulled out a long strap from his bag, placed it under Isa's knees, and guided Jonathan to hold both ends. He's going to try to lift her knees. We just stabilize. The movement has to come from her. Jonathan frowned. You sure? Zeke nodded. She's ready. They waited a few seconds. Isa furrowed her brow, closed her eyes, and breathed heavier. Then, both knees lifted, just a bit, less than half an inch, but clearly they moved. Jonathan stared at his daughter, stunned. Did you really do that? Isa nodded, smiling. I did it. Jonathan was speechless. You actually did it? Zeke watched the strap intently and gave a small nod. See, the body remembers. You just have to be patient and let it speak. Jonathan looked at Zeke, shaking his head with a quiet chuckle. You're something else. Zeke didn't answer. He just moved on to Isa's next exercise. As the session wrapped up and they began to pack, Jonathan crouched down beside Zeke. Where do you go after these sessions? Zeke shrugged. Here and there. Jonathan lowered his voice. Do you have a place to sleep? Zeke hesitated, then replied, sometimes. Jonathan sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. Ever thought about staying at my place for a while? Zeke's eyes widened. You mean that? I've got a guest room. Nobody uses it. You won't be in anyone's way. Zeke looked down at his hands. You sure your neighbors won't mind a kid like me? Jonathan let out a short laugh. You helped my daughter do something the entire hospital couldn't. If anyone has a problem with that, I'll tell them to leave. Zeke didn't say anything right away, but Jonathan could see in the boy's eyes the wheels were turning. The next morning, Zeke stood in front of Jonathan's house, a backpack slung over one shoulder, a tightly rolled blanket tucked under the other arm. The door opened. Jonathan was in sweatpants, coffee mug in hand. He smiled, right on time. Issa ran to the hallway, hair tied off to one side, eyes sparkling. Seeing, he smiled back. Hey there, superstar. Jonathan stepped aside. Welcome home. A boy who was once invisible had become the heart of a family. A little girl who once couldn't move now knew how to hope. And a man who had once shut out the world had finally let it in. Do you believe that just a little faith, a little patience, and a heart that truly cares can change someone's life? The days that followed passed quietly but meaningfully. Zeke now had a room of his own, a soft bed, clean sheets, and a small desk. He didn't talk much, but he was up early every morning to train with Issa. Now she could move both of her feet. She still couldn't walk, but her brain had started reconnecting the signals, as if trying to remember something it once knew well. One night, while washing dishes, Jonathan suddenly paused, leaning against the kitchen counter. Zeke, he said without turning around. The boy, drawing at the dining table, looked up. Have you ever thought about going back to school? Zeke nodded slightly. You're smart, Jonathan continued. You could go far. Zeke tilted his head, his voice quiet. I want to help people walk again, like my mom used to. Jonathan turned to face him. Then let's figure out a way for you to do that. Zeke gave a soft smile. Okay. Nothing more was said, but nothing needed to be, because for the first time in years, the Reeves household wasn't filled with silence. It was alive, with footsteps, laughter, the scratch of pencil on paper, and the sound of healing. It all started spreading from a nurse at the Children's Medical Center. One Sunday morning, while walking her border collie through Harrington Park, she spotted a familiar face. Issa. Issa began to mold over this Wonder Woman. A story be clean up. Oh, she could sleep better. Easy. Issa said she hadn't seen the girl out of a wheelchair in months. And never smiling like that, lifting her knees, wiggling her toes. And standing beside her was the quiet boy who used to sit outside the hospital every weekend. The nurse didn't interrupt. She simply watched from afar. But when she got home, she told her sister, who worked in patient care. A few days later, a physical therapist stopped Jonathan in a hospital hallway. Hey, I heard Issa's improving. Is that true? Jonathan nodded. Yeah. Thanks to someone I never expected. The news spread quickly. The next time they arrived at Harrington Park, two families were already sitting on the bench near the old oak tree. One boy used a walker, one girl was recovering from a stroke. Both families had heard about the boy who helped that Reeves girl move her legs again. Zeke glanced at Jonathan. Jonathan met his gaze with a small nod. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. Zeke adjusted his backpack strap, his eyes steady. I want to. That day, he gave up Asa's training time to help the new kids. He showed parents how to stretch with towels, how to heat the rice packs properly, how to encourage without pressuring, and he spoke to the children as equals. You're not broken. You're just learning a different way to be strong. Issa sat in her wheelchair, watching it all. Not a single complaint, just pride. On the ride home, she said softly, I like watching him help other people. Jonathan looked at her through the rear-view mirror. Makes me feel like I'm part of something good too. He smiled. The following weekend, 5 families were waiting. The weekend after that, the number grew. A local pastor brought folding chairs. A nearby cafe started donating bagels and free coffee. Someone printed flyers with bold letters that read, "Free movement class, Sundays at 12 p.m., Harrington Park." There was no name, but everyone knew who it was. A local reporter showed up, camera and notepad in hand. Jonathan pulled Zeke aside. "You okay with this?" Zeke looked around at the smiling families, the kids stretching their arms and legs, and Isa laughing with a girl using a walker. He nodded. "As long as it's not about me, but about them." The article was published. Page 2 of the Birmingham Sunday Post, under the headline, "9-year-old boy with a special gift helps dozens recover at City Park." Zeke's full name wasn't shared, just as he wished, but people found out anyway. A local doctor offered to mentor Zeke. A non-profit pledged to provide supplies. Others volunteered to tutor him for free. For the first time since his mother passed, people didn't just see Zeke, they truly saw him. But Zeke never bragged. Every Sunday he still laid his towel in the same spot, still wore his duct-tape boots, and always checked in on Isa before helping anyone else. The park, once filled with heavy breaths and stillness, now moved with energy and purpose. And the boy who once had no place to belong had become the heart of something far greater than himself. 9 Sundays had passed. 9 times laying down the towel. 9 times Isa lifted her knees. 9 little victories shared among strangers who now felt like family. But this Sunday was different. Zeke could sense it before they even reached the park. The air was warmer. Trees swayed gently. Isa sat quietly in the back seat, her eyes focused, like she was preparing for something big. When they arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Not loud, not flashy, just families setting up folding chairs, therapists kneeling beside young children, and parents wearing expressions filled with hope. At the center, still the weathered wooden bench under the big oak tree, Zeke said nothing. He opened his bag, spread the towel, and turned to eat. "Ready?" She nodded. No smile, just a look serious, determined. Jonathan wheeled his daughter to the center of the mat. Zeke knelt in front of her. "Just like before. We'll help you stand. The rest is up to you." Jonathan stood behind her, placing his hands gently under her arms. Zeke carefully adjusted her legs into position. "Okay," he whispered. "On the count of 3. Isa closed her eyes. 2, 3. Jonathan lifted. Zeke steadied her knees. Esther stood. Her legs trembled. Her arms shook slightly. But she stood on her own 2 feet. The crowd held its breath. A few kids stared with open mouths. A mother raised her hand to her mouth. Isa opened her eyes slowly and smiled. "I'm standing. Can you feel it?" It wasn't just the moment a child stood up. It was the moment an entire community, once fractured, once hopeless, rose together. And the miracle didn't begin with machines or money. It began with a 9-year-old boy, a sketchbook, and a heart that refused to give up. Zeke blinked, holding back whatever was rising in his eyes. "Yeah, you're standing." Jonathan was frozen, breath caught in his throat. Then he let go. Isa was still standing. He stepped back, hands trembling, voice cracking. "She's really standing." Zeke took a step back too, nodding gently. He's been standing for a while now. He sighs. 6 years old, brave, and never one to fear. Took a step, a second, and then, because she was a child, she took the 3rd step with all her heart. Before collapsing into her father's arms, Jonathan caught her, both of them laughing, crying. His hands trembled as he held her close. "You did it," he whispered. "You really did it." Isaac turned to Zeke. "You said I would." Zeke smiled. "I said we'd try together." That afternoon, no one was in a hurry to leave the park. People stayed, talking, hugging, some quietly offering prayers. Zeke sat silently on the wooden bench, watching it all unfold, like someone listening to the world with his heart. He didn't speak much. He never needed to. That evening, in their cozy kitchen, Jonathan washed dishes while Zeke poured cereal into a bowl. Jonathan spoke softly, not turning around. "You know, you've changed everything." Zeke didn't look up. "I know." Jonathan walked over, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "My daughter walked Not because of a hospital or a doctor or some advanced treatment, but because a kid with nothing in his hands kept showing up. Again and again, even though no one told him to. Zeke nodded. It's what my mom would have done. Jonathan was speechless for a moment. I wish she could have seen this, Zeke whispered. She did. I think she saw all of it. Jonathan wiped his eyes, voice thick with emotion. Zeke, you're going to change so many lives. Zeke looked at him, eyes glowing like a candle that wouldn't go out. I already started. In this world, there are people without degrees or perfect resumes or glamorous pasts, but they carry something far more valuable. A heart, persistence, and a reason to keep showing up every single day. Sometimes, it's the ones who've been hurt the most, who hold the power to help others heal. If this story has touched you, don't keep it to yourself, share it. And if you ever meet a child like Zeke or a girl like Isa, tell them this: you matter. You are needed. If you still believe in miracles in this world, if you still believe in kindness, in persistence, and in the healing power of the human heart, then don't forget to subscribe to stay connected to stories that move and inspire. Like this video if it's sparked something in you. Turn on the notification bell to be the first to witness more journeys that touch the soul. Because who knows, maybe one day you'll be the one to change someone's life simply by showing up, just like Zeke did.